Hey everyone, Chris Chico, and in today's video, I have an expert here that is going to walk us through the best strategies for today in terms of finding motivated sellers using skip tracing, using cold calling, and directly getting in touch with the highest probability sellers in your local market, and really how to take advantage of the opportunity that exists with this particular methodology, because some of you may be experiencing the fact that direct mail, which a lot of investors have done over the past couple of years, it's getting tougher, and you have to put a lot of money on the table with direct mail in order to have a chance at making it work. And so for any of you that either are starting out brand new in the business, or maybe you are already in the business and you've been doing other sorts of marketing and you're just not getting those marketing channels to produce, then this is definitely going to be the video for you. And I have here with me Larry Higgins, who owns a service called Skip Genie. And we're going to be talking about the strategy. We're going to be talking about Skip Genie because of the fact that I personally use the service. And I want to preface this video by saying that I am not in any way whatsoever getting compensated by Larry or his company. So there's no, hey, if you sign up for his thing, then I'm going to make some money. And I chose to do that because if I'm making a recommendation here in the channel, I want you guys to know that I'm doing so only because I'm 100% behind the product or service, and not because I want to make extra money with you guys buying into the, whatever it is that we're talking about here today. And what happened with me is that I was trying to figure out, what service I was going to use for skip tracing and for getting phone numbers. And I went out and I took the same list and I skip traced it with 4 other different services. I'm not going to mention who those services are. However, there's services that if you were to go in any group, any Facebook group or any forum, if you type in, hey, I'm looking for skip tracing, what would you recommend? Chances are the services that I tested are going to be one of the ones that you would get recommended. And so what I did is I went ahead and submitted the list to each of those services, exact same list, and then I got back the results. And by far, above and beyond everybody, Skip Genie gave me the best results, meaning that they gave me the most amount of property owners that I got phone numbers for, and also the volume of phone numbers, right? Because in any particular property, you could go out and just get one phone number, or maybe you can get a variety of different phone numbers for that same contact person, and that'll give you a better chance of trying to find that individual. And so, so that's why I settled on Skip Genie, and it's the service that I use. I pay a monthly subscription to them, and we'll get into how all that works, but I'm a customer of theirs. So Larry, I want to thank you first of all for coming on here with me today so we can chat about this. I really appreciate that. And so, just real quick, maybe tell everybody about your backstory and how did this even come about? The fact that, you have Skip Genie, how did that come about to begin with, and your history with regards to real estate?
I planned it all out perfectly 5 years ago.
It came to you in a dream.
Yeah. I had a premonition, and no, it's so my background is I have a construction project management background. A few years ago, basically, long story short, I got into a job that I just hated going to. First time in my life. Like I joke around, it's not because I had glamorous jobs before that. It's just I hated going to the office, and I ended up just quitting my job and jumping into real estate. Didn't even know my own house at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And as a newbie, this was about 4.5 years ago. What do? You send mail and you do bandit signs. That's what I kept hearing: mail and bandit signs. And I heard about driving for dollars, but
right.
I just didn't have terrible success. And I can get into some of the reasons why. It wasn't because I wasn't getting phone calls.
Mm-hmm.
I did get phone calls, but as a new investor with no training,
right.
Nothing, didn't know how to negotiate, didn't know how to properly estimate some things, and just being reluctant and being kind of nervous about getting under contract, can I perform? So less than stellar results initially.
Mm-hmm.
But through one thing I found out real quick, I got all this return mail.
Right.
And I'm like, what do I do with this? Somebody had mentioned skip tracing. I kept hearing that term. I'm like, okay, I'll try and do that. And at the same time, I also kept hearing driving for dollars, drive for dollars. I kept seeing this come up in, whether it's Bigger Pockets or on Facebook. Like, hey, I don't have any money. I'm brand new. What I do? Everybody kept saying, these were experienced guys, quote unquote, the gurus. Everybody saying, go drive for dollars, find vacant houses. And I was just like, well, hell, if that's the best lead to get when you don't have any money, if it's that easy or they're that great, why not be really good at it?
Right.
And I had return mail coming in from my mailings, and I really went out and started just driving for dollars. I'd pick an area. I had a map tracking function I was keeping track of, and I'd go out and drive 6-8 hours. And just through trial and error, I figured out with return mail and vacant houses, in general, those people can be harder to reach. And I start off like a ton of investors. I use white pages, Spokio, Intellius, been verified, and I was running in circles. And I just said, hey, I need to get better at this. I need better data. And started going down a path of TLO, trying out. A lot of people have heard of TLO. Back then, you could get approved with a home office. I went through that whole process, got approved. And the difference in data was night and day. I started seeing, hey, a lot of these people, I can't get them on the phone because they're dead. The other services weren't showing me that, or just getting better phone numbers in general and that kind of thing. And so one thing, I just kept going with that, and I started getting really good at skip tracing and finding people. I said, hey, one thing I noticed was they're much easier if you can find the owner of a vacant house or return mail. Nobody else is really talking to them, and that's huge in my favor, because if I'm competing against nobody as far as the deal goes, I can generally win.
Right.
Not always, but it helps me tremendously. I don't claim to be the greatest salesman or negotiator. And, I just started doing deals that way, finding vacant houses and going that route. Through a mutual friend, I met my partner, Will. I actually helped him find an owner of a property of a vacant house that he couldn't find. And we linked up and said, hey, let's do something with just skip tracing and cold calling. And that was the other thing. I didn't set out to start just calling people, but what I learned was, even with good data, you don't know which is the best address to mail to, because you might get 10 addresses. And you never can really tell which is the best one. Generally, it's probably going to be the first one listed, but we've all seen the vacant house where the property address and the mailing address are the same. I see a skip trace report where it's the same. Right. So what I learned was, hey, just get them on, try calling. And just by doing that, I'm like, you know what? Nobody else is calling. What if I just call? Again, this was 4 years ago. It's gotten a lot more prevalent now, but it's still a great method. So, we were working together and working on increasing our volume and capacity to do things, built out internally our own skip tracing capacity, basically. And we were just going to do high volume skip tracing for bigger investors around the country. It's going to be like a little side business. Right. And after I went on the first podcast, we just got tremendous feedback on a lot of people, newer investors struggling to get their first deal. Or, hey, I don't need to skip trace 2,000 people. I've got 100 or 200 a month or somewhere in there. And that's where we really shifted gears, and we built out our dashboard, which that's a huge component of skip tracing, is to be able to go in, do individual searches, look at the relatives, the addresses, do what I call an address search. And it just grew from there. Sorry if that got a little long-winded, but
no. I have some questions about a few of the things you mentioned. So I was writing a few things down because you talked about the batch versus the dashboard. So for right now, so in other words, say we look at skip tracing, and so let's say we look at the getting in touch with the owner. So I had a couple questions for you on that. Is that what do you say if somebody's looking, let's say somebody's looking to get started with trying to get people on the phone, right? Yep. So the first question that comes to mind is, who do they call first, right? So in your scenario, you had mail that you had done already, right? So that was easy. Because I have a question to you about the return mail. So I want to come back to that. But if somebody is just starting out, they hadn't done any direct mail, they're just trying to figure out what's the best way for them to approach this. Where do we start off first? Do we start off? I assume we start off first with figuring out who is it, who are the best prospects. Like if you're going to would you start off with batching? Because I know before you guys didn't have batch service, but you do now. Would you start with batching, or would you start with really trying to get a smaller list of people in order to try to get started with it? What's your recommendation?
I tell people, that's a common scenario I give, like, hey, I'm new, I don't have a ton of money.
Right.
I'm willing to put the work in. I say, look, in a big market, like I just had a guy go drive in Houston. In the course of 5 or 6 days, he went and found, I don't know, almost 400 vacant houses. It's not that hard. So I tell people, look, go get 100 or 200 vacant houses. And, there are some services. You don't have to go build a fancy tool to do list stacking. You can do what I call manual list stacking.
Mm-hmm.
Populate all those addresses in a spreadsheet, or if you're using a Driving for Dollars app, you can download it and then look at things. Does it show, just looking at the owner names, does it show in the estate of? Right, automatically, it's a dead owner. So not only is it vacancy, it's a deceased owner. This is without tracing. And then where do the mailing addresses go for those vacant houses? Do you see any out of state or 5 hours away? So now you've got an owner that's out of state or hundreds of miles away. Let's call that points in distress. And then I look at delinquent taxes. That's a lot of people love delinquent taxes in general, but again, this is free information. You're just going to the tax assessor, tax collector, whatever you call it in your state, and you just look up each property. And so say you go get 100 or 200 vacant houses and you fill in the spreadsheet, mm-hmm. who's dead, if they show estates, the estate of, and you're going to find deceased owner, you're going to find estates on vacant houses.
Right.
That's a big reason why they go vacant a lot of times. And I promise you're going to see delinquent taxes too. And then you might see the out-of-state stuff and things like that. So out of 100 or 200 properties, what's your top 20 based off of those things? Maybe you have a ton of tax delinquencies. Even that can be prioritized. Who's got the biggest tax delinquency or the longest?
Mm-hmm.
You're in Florida. Y'all's is a little bit different system. It's, the tax lien system and all that. They get auctioned off, I guess, in a couple of years. But in Texas, it can drag on for 15 years.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So you can see crazy tax delinquencies in Texas.
What about, just out of curiosity, what about length of ownership? So in other words, is that another trigger for you that somebody's owned the property for a long time?
Well, the main thing is, one reason I don't like to filter by length of ownership necessarily. Mm-hmm. Well, I like to look at it because if you see delinquent taxes and they've owned it since, I'll just use Harris County as an example. If somebody's owned a house since 1980, it basically stops at 1988. Like when you look at ownership history, it just says 1988.
Right.
So I just do that. You want to increases the odds that there's a ton of equity in the house.
I see. Right.
Then when you have delinquent taxes, that tells me it's very likely there's no loan on the house or those taxes would be paid. Not always. With home equity loans, they don't always escrow the taxes, so you can see a tax delinquency even with a home equity loan on there. Mm-hmm. But so that's I do look at length of ownership just because if I see it just changed ownership, last year or 6 months ago, well, maybe it's an investor that just hasn't gotten around to
paying it. So one of the things you mentioned is you're looking for vacant property. So just to clarify, so if you're driving for dollars, typically you're looking for properties that look vacant or look like they're in a state of disrepair, right? So my assumption is, because you said you're specifically looking for vacant, are you, I'm trying to figure, because if I'm driving around an area, I may not know that, property, I guess if it's vacant, it's going to look like the grass is overgrown, looks like there's no car, etc. And so those are the ones you're going for. You're not really going for somebody where the property looks like hell in the neighborhood, because they might just live there and be okay with the house looking like hell. Is that right?
Starting out, I'm just looking for confirmed. There's some that you'll find out later. Hey, it's not. You'll think that's got to be vacant, and you'll find out maybe somebody's living there.
Right. Okay.
For the people starting out, it's like you want no BS vacant houses.
Okay. So then vacant houses, you're driving for dollars, vacant houses. So I want to ask you a question. number one is one side question is you're driving around looking for those deals. What about if I bought a list? You know, there's different services out there, different vendors that sell you a vacant house property list. So what's the difference between driving for dollars and then just buying a list in the zip codes that you're looking to do this in?
And you touched on this. I saw one of your videos a while back. I tell people about the vacant house list, whether you buy an actual list or use a service where you can create, pick a zip code and download them, whatever.
Right.
There are vacant houses on there, but there's a ton of them that aren't.
Right.
So if you can still filter those. If you have the ability to take that vacant list and stack it against something else, like a delinquent tax list or probates or something like that, that really helps you narrow down which ones are truly vacant if you have that second criteria, that second distress factor going on.
Okay. That makes sense. So in other words, if you're saying that if you're going to get it from a service, because that data is not 100% accurate, obviously, just across the board from all the services, then better it is to try to stack that against something else to try to narrow that list out.
Because now you see the. I can tell you, I actually bought a list from. I actually mailed that list a long time ago. I forgot. I think I bought it from Melissa Data, and I started getting a lot of phone calls like, "Why are you mailing me? My house isn't vacant." Blah blah blah. And going back and looking, like, I'm always looking where are the common denominators or what did certain things have in common. And I started realizing that a lot of those houses had PO boxes. And when you look at what the criteria is, all these companies, all these list providers, all their lists originate from the United States Postal Service.
I see. Got it.
Provide that list to HUD. It's based off of the house hasn't received mail in like 90 days. So then it dawned on me, because I actually tried to go directly to HUD to get that list and I couldn't get it. But I learned all about the criteria of where it's coming from. And then it made sense. If it's going to PO box, the house isn't getting mail, so it stays on the vacant list.
I get it. Okay. And then just out of curiosity, in terms of driving for dollars, whether it be you or somebody else, you said, what are you using, just out of curiosity, as an app to kind of organize yourself around that? I know there's an app that called Land Glide that I'm familiar with. Are you using anything in particular? Like if you're having...
I use Lane Glide all the time just for quick research while I'm out and about. But as far as driving for dollars, I have a guy that's I've compared there's three big ones, I guess, are the most common ones.
Mm-hmm.
The best offering, in my opinion, right now is Drive By REI, and I kind of like everything they do and their price points.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I have. The guy that's driving right now, I have used it. Just if I see something, I'll drop a pin and add it to my leads.
Right.
He's really running it through the ringer. Like I said, he went and got almost 400 vacants. My goal is to get 1,000, and I want to see how many deals we can generate out of, because I haven't driven for dollars in a long time specifically.
And how much do you pay that? How in this particular scenario, since you're out, you have somebody else do it for you? What do you pay them?
He's going to get a commission out of any deals I get. And I think I'm giving him a couple $100 for gas, but he's going to get a commission out of any of the deals. We're actually doing an appointment this morning. I have a guy on an appointment as of 20 minutes ago on that first round of 400.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so you pay him so he's driving around. You're not paying him anything except for gas, but he will get a commission out of any deal. Would you mind? What would that be? Just as a general rule of thumb, what would you say is I guess you're paying a commission based on whatever assignment fee or whatever the money that you make on a deal.
I told him I'll pay him 10% off of the assignment fee.
Okay, and he doesn't have to do anything but just provide you with, just do the drive-bys and provide the leads. Okay, right. All right. And how did you find that person?
He's one of our acquisition agents. He's just a friend, and he's interested in real estate, and he's pretty motivated. And I really didn't have it. I'm not looking to take on another agent, and I don't know that he'd be the right sales guy, but I'm like, hey, this is something I've wanted to do, a mass, go find 1,000 vacant houses and see what we can get out of it.
Yeah.
I said, hey, if you go find 1,000, we're going to get something. I don't know how many, I'll get something.
You'll get something, right. Okay.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if there was 5 or 6 deals or more, or maybe it's one. So anyway, he's pretty motivated. And that's how we made that connection.
So now you guys, I want to touch on because you guys have, in terms of your service, you have a batch skip service,
Yep.
right? And then you also have a deep, the dashboard, right?
Yep.
So what are the differences between the two in terms of how much data you get from each?
It's really the exact same data set minus on the bulk skip trace. We don't give you like date of birth, date of death. We just tell you if they're deceased, we give you a hard firm, yes, they're deceased.
Right.
And basically, because if you're bulk skip tracing, you really don't, that's just more clutter, that specific data point. You're not really paying attention to it. So what I like to do with a big list, like that list of 400 vacant houses,
Yeah.
we do a bulk skip trace on the 400. And now the very first thing I do is look and see who's deceased.
Got it. Okay. That was my question. Cause I was from a process. I didn't know if you're going to do a deep, cause I noticed on the deep, when we do the deep, we get all the relatives, right?
Yes.
And so you're not going to get that on the bulk, right?
Yeah, we give you the names, but you don't have the ability to click on the name and pull the report. It's just just the text. So just as far as the process goes, we do the bulk skip trace, and this isn't just with vacant houses. This is with any list. If you do a bulk skip trace, I deal a lot with our customers. The very first time they do a bulk skip trace, it may be a list of 1,000 or 2,000. I'm like, the very first thing I do is look for the dead owners, unless it's a probate list.
Yeah.
You didn't know those people had died. So whatever the nature of that list was, whether it was bankruptcy, taxes, code violation, now you've got this other indicator on top of it. It's a deceased owner.
I see. So is that your first go-to? I think, like you mentioned before, death and taxes, right?
Yep.
Right. Which is interesting because that's what they say, right? There's only two your life is death and taxes.
And on top of that, you've probably seen this when you dig in on some of these. Sometimes that the death isn't recorded in any of these databases for us to show it.
Right.
So in context, especially again using vacant houses as the scenario, you'll see owners that are 85, 95, 100 years old, but they're not showing as deceased.
Mm.
But I know there's a good chance they actually have died. It's just that record isn't there for us to grab.
Okay.
So first thing I'll do is I'll look for the deceased owners, and then you can filter in descending order by age. And you do it enough, you'll find people 110 years old that are alive, supposedly.
Right. No, that. So then now the one thing I noticed. So just to further clarify. So you have the bulk. I can go in and say if I do a driving of 100 properties. So I'll go in and I'll do the bulk search, and I'll get all those people. Now from that, I would go and sort that, and I will find a certain number of them that are going to show up as deceased, right? Yep. Now those deceased, I can call the phone numbers that show up on the bulk, but I can also take that and then do the deep search with them. Would that be accurate?
That's exactly what I tell, especially the newer people, just to try and save a little time and money on maybe pulling some more reports. But with on the deceased people, if you call whatever numbers show up, especially with the elderly, a lot of times close family members' phone numbers show up on each other's reports.
Right.
You're trying to call Mary and you get in touch with her daughter, Judy, and her, especially with the elderly, I think just because the children help step in at some point and they're involved with a lot of accounts with their parents, but it's not uncommon to reach a family member. You can't count on it. So I recommend go ahead and call those numbers and see if anybody answers that's related.
So then now if you can't, let's say I do the drive-by list, I do the bulk, and I get all phone numbers, and then I call everybody. And let's say that there were, let's say I know that the numbers vary, but if you got 100 drive-bys of vacant properties, as a percentage, how many of those do you think would show flags of the debt or taxes? Would it be about 20%? 20 of those might, or be less?
It as far as death or taxes?
Yeah.
Oh, I'd say probably 50% or more 50%. As far as one or the other. And what I'm really looking for, I call it the trifecta: death, taxes, and vacancy.
Death, taxes, and vacancy. So then now, in that scenario, let's say that I have Joe Smith, who happens to be a record. I call all the phone numbers that are listed on the batch. And so I can't find him. So then now I could do a deep on him, because this is what I noticed. I did this a couple of weeks back. There was a guy we were trying to find. And then when I did the deep, it shows a bunch of relatives, right? And so then what I did is I did a deep search on each and every single one of the relatives. And then I finally got a hold of somebody that was somewhat related. Is that kind of, would you recommend that that's the process?
Exactly. Just like I tell people, even if they're alive and I just can't reach them, it doesn't have to just be deceased owners. Sometimes you just can't. You either just can't get a good phone number, or you can't get that person to respond to you.
Right.
I don't hesitate. It's like if when I go and pull that person's report, even if it's not obvious how they're related, but somebody shows up as a possible relative, I'll call everybody.
You'll call everybody to try.
Yeah, I'm just looking for anybody that knows will talk to me and maybe give me some information or get me in touch, fill me in on what's going on.
Okay. And just out of curiosity, because I'm asking you some details here, but generally when you, I was just curious, when you go ahead and you call this bulk trace list initially, right? Are you using a dialer or you just call everybody manually? I was curious.
We haven't used, right now we have, we're in flux with some of our callers. So the one lady we have calling consistently right now, she's just using her phone dialing manually.
Okay.
A lot of that is, these are the more research leads. It's hard to do a bulk skip trace and get everything in a spreadsheet. But we use Hot Prospector as an auto dialer, and we will get back to using that probably in January.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, because what we've done is that we would take all the leads and put them in the Mojo, and we would dial through them, right? At least to try to get through as many as we can, and then we can always go back and relook at whichever ones we've not been able to contact, etc.
Yeah.
But it sounds like yeah. So then the the driving for dollars, and just when you're doing the driving for dollars and you're getting to that point where you have the dead taxes and the vacancy, the high likelihood prospects, are you finding a lot of competition or with other investors?
Not generally, especially when there's a deceased owner. And I'm always paying attention to see, like, if I get a note like, hey, they said they've been getting a lot of calls, or they talked to a lot of investors, I'm like, well, what? I'm looking to see, is the market turn, is this channel turning?
Right.
But generally when that happens, it's the owner's either alive or they weren't hard to find, or the relative was a part of a probate and they were the executor. Generally there's a reason why I hear that in that scenario.
Okay.
But a lot of times, like I said, there's nobody. And I'll say this, it's, if you call enough properties like that, it's not a matter of if, but when and how often. You'll get a response like, hey, we'd love to sell it, but we can't. The county owns it now, or the bank owns it now. These people, it sounds crazy. They can't realize that they still own the property.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times the heirs just walk away from them. Or I've had them say, hey, I told the county to take it. We're not paying the taxes. They don't think there's any value in the home. They just see it as a liability.
Right.
They don't realize a phone call doesn't convey title. So I will say, don't ever take them at their word. You've already researched it. They're showing up in the appraisal district or whatever site you're using. It's those, when I hear that the bank owns it now or the county, I get excited, because really those owners have accepted zero for that property.
Right.
Anything you offer them above zeros, that's a net gain to them. Some of our best deals were that exact scenario where they either thought they had lost it or they didn't even realize they owned it or could sell it.
Yeah. So that's an interesting thing, because one of the things about this particular strategy is that you're not trying to, there's different models in this business, right? And I'm not saying every model, not saying anything negative about every model, but there's a model of send out a bunch of mail, and then the mail is going to generate a ton of phone calls. So you're going to need staff in order to handle those calls. Because if you're sending out 30 or 40 grand, so 30,000 pieces of mail, you're going to have a lot of leads. So you need a lead manager, you need acquisitions, and everything else. With the model that you guys are running, with doing this type of analysis and also going after these leads, it's really more of a sniper approach. You're not looking to do, and I had a conversation, you're not looking to do 10 to 15 deals a month. I mean, if you can get that many, that's great. But you're doing less deals, but these deals end up being bigger deals in general. Would you say that's accurate?
Exactly. And so you don't have to spend as much money. Like I say, it's not passive. It's not passive like mail or PPC or something like that. There is work involved. You're going to do the research, but that's where most people starting out, that's, typically they don't have a lot of money, but they do have the time and the energy, and they're willing to put that work in.
Right.
And what's right today may not be the best and only option for you a year from now, as you have more money to invest and you have systems in place. It's always changing, but I'll give you an example. I just had a lady message me 2 or 3 weeks ago. Her very first two had all three of the issues: death, vacancy, and when she reached the air didn't realize she had walked away from it.
Mm-hmm.
Literally paid her like $2,000 or something. And it was, again, she was a retired cop in south of Dallas. Her very first deal was a $65,000 assignment.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Like zero competition. And obviously, like I told her, I'm happy and sad for you. I'm happy, great job, very first deal, but now this is your expectation, man.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't work out that easy every time. Yeah.
So then now, when the driving, so we talk about the driving for dollars list is one to go after. What about the other type of niche lists? When you have like a list is a tax delinquent list. You can go out and buy a tax delinquent list or acquire it from the county. So that list there, is that a list that, again, you would consider, or is that a list that sometimes is getting a little bit too much traffic just on its own?
Well, they do delinquent taxes, especially when they're easy to get. And, some states and counties, it's a real easy list to get, others not so much. But you just have to know, like in Harris County, there's 10,000 or more single family properties with delinquent taxes.
Yeah.
Probably more than that, not listed on the MLS. You have to know it's going to be a lot more dials. So your ratio of dials to deals is going to be greater. Right. Because there's going to be more competition, and just delinquent taxes, a lot of people aren't sweating that. They're like, I'll make a decision when or if I have to down the road.
I got it. Yeah.
So it kind of goes back to, it's not a different marketing channel, but it's a different strategy with cold calling. It's going to take more calls. And I can tell you this from our own experience, when we did dial that list, we weren't set up for all the, what I call tire kickers or the colder leads that they were kind of interested, but it wasn't the day. And we were so used to people just like, doing deals on the phone, locking them up on the phone or within a couple of days, that we had all these cold leads that we didn't have follow-up processes in place and all that. I know we lost, who knows? I know we lost deals. I don't know how many, but because you're going to have to be able to facilitate that. And so that was a learning lesson for us. I like code violation because a lot of times those tend to be vacant houses. Code violation in Texas through a service here in Texas. There's I can get a list of estates, properties owned by estates. So one mistake I see some people make is they consider probate and estate the same thing. Well, it's not. A lot of houses that are estates won't necessarily be on the probate list. So a probate list means somebody has gone and opened probate through the county clerk or surrogate's court, whatever y'all call it in your state.
Right.
They've opened it. An estate just means the owner's died and the county knows it.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So especially if you see an estate with a severe tax delinquency, or you see an estate and the house has just been obviously abandoned and it's not taken care of, like I say, we deal a lot with dead owners on our deals, but rarely is there a will involved. People die all the time with no wills, and then the family may not have the means or the ability to open probate. They don't know what to do, or they can't afford to do it.
Right.
So that's another list I like, if you can get it, is the estate.
Is the estate list.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I was thinking about is, let's say that, and I'm wondering if this is something that you would recommend. Let's say that I'm in South Florida, right? So I have a bucket of zip codes that say that are my winners. And let's say that if I took one zip code and I narrow that list down to the ones that I would normally mail. So let's say I get that list down to say 1,000 names, right? I was just thinking about this as you and I were talking. And let's say a lot of people, what they're doing now is they're going out and just taking, a list of 5,000 to 10,000 people and putting them on the auto dialer and calling them. But now you need a bunch of, either you do it or you got callers to do it. I was just thinking, if I took that list through your service, of the absentee owners, right, that have owned the property for 20 plus years, and then you gave me back the list, but it said how old the people were, and we know that historically the older people are the ones that we do most business with. Would that be a better way for me to narrow that list, and I could call, and then also further narrow down in terms of trying to find those owners that are even more predisposed?
Yeah, like say it's a list of 1,000 people. That's quite a few calls.
Right.
I'm real big on prioritization, especially with limited capacity.
Right.
So it's like, hey, obviously the deceased owners, we talked about that, but I will call them in descending order by age. I want to call the oldest people first and just work down that 1,000, because those will probably be your more likely candidates to sell. We do a lot with probability and likelihood. And when you're always looking at where the common denominator, like you said, the older people are more predisposed to sell, or, they're more likely to be your sellers. So I'm always looking at stuff like that. If you don't have a call center that can just knock out calling 1,000 property owners in a couple of days, you need to prioritize your time and your energy. And
yeah, because that's the thing I thought about. Because when when it comes to cold calling, the thing and I'd love to hear your input on this, but if we're talking about just bulk, there's different nuances, right? So if we talk about just cold calling, then we have to segregate cold calling into a couple of different buckets, right? One is, I think, what you're doing, kind of being the sniper. And then you got the cold calling that a lot of times you see out there, which is you're going to cold call for 2 to 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. You're going to put in the 40 to 60 hours a month of cold calling, brute force, in order to find leads. And then, so that sometimes is difficult, I think, from, number one is you got to have the time to be able to do that. And then, it just becomes a lot more overwhelming. So to me, it feels like, what you're not doing that kind of bulk, just to confirm, you're not doing that sort of calling. You're just, again, trying to narrow down the prospects and figuring out who are your best likely candidates, and you're doing everything you can in order to find them.
Yeah, I'm actually gonna do more of that. We did a little bit of that a while back, and we didn't have the systems in place, like I said, because you get so many, hey, I don't know what your offer, or yeah, maybe, what are you offering, or everything's for sale at the right price. You get all these different responses.
Right.
So actually, I'm going to ramp that back up not probably in January, and I want to do both. It's not one or the other for me.
Okay.
I understand there's a difference in how you execute on both sides of that.
I see. Okay.
So that's like I tell people starting out, first and foremost, it's figure out your process, whatever it is, whatever you're really good at as far as whatever type of lead it is. To me, it's vacancy. If I could only pick one criteria ever, it's going to be vacant houses, because vacancy tends to correlate more with other distress factors than any other lead type out there, as far as I'm concerned. When you see vacancy, you see death, you see taxes, loans in default, bankruptcy, divorce, code violations, all that stuff. But as soon as you get a deal or two, or you knock out a 50,000 or whatever it is, whether it's a dollar amount or a number of deals in the confidence, it's like, okay, you can only do so many calls and research by yourself every day.
Right.
At some point, and the cheapest thing, the next step for me, what I advise people is like, figure out who's going to help you do calls, whether it's a local caller or a VA. Have somebody do those calls for you while you work on more lead generation, whether it's list or driving for dollars. Right. Training a caller is easy. Hey, would you like to, in a nutshell, would you like to sell? If they do, they set an appointment up for you to call, and you be the negotiator and the sales guy.
And it's easier because, I mean, in your model, you're not hiring somebody to be 3 hours on a dialer pumping through calls. It's just I need to get a hold of these people, and you're hiring somebody. So it's a little bit easier, I think, right, than the hiring a cold caller, right? That's just going to sit on a dialer all for 3 hours a day. Yeah.
And you've got that runs the gamut. You've got VAs you can go hire, which they can get you leads, but I'm not a big proponent of VAs because they can't. I've done split testing on that. Yeah. And on some highly distressed leads, it was just 50 properties, highly, highly distressed, all kinds of stuff going on. The VAs produced 2 leads out of that. But when I gave that exact same data set, what I found was I had a bunch of properties where I wasn't getting a no, there was just no disposition.
Right.
Nobody was answering. Nobody was calling back. Gave that exact same list of data, that same data to a local caller, and she produced 4 more leads out of it.
Oh, interesting. Okay. And so
So I'll pay that premium, me personally.
what
So
would you what would you be your recommended what you would pay somebody to do that for you locally? 15-20 bucks an hour?
yeah, 15 to 20 bucks,
Yeah.
whatever, and it's very subjective. I don't know if we really need how much you want to get into cold callers, but what I'm looking for is somebody that's pleasant to talk to and just cheerful and very personable on the phone and can get people to open up, because
Right.
people will open up to you sometimes. And my issue with VAs is they tend to be kind of robotic. They can have great English, very little accent, but they want to stick to a script.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
literally have a lady saying, "Oh, it's my daddy's house. He died, last month, and da 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 da. We're afraid we're going to lose it." And the VA's like, "So how many bedrooms?"
Right. Yeah. 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 Very well. That's what I noticed with the overseas VAs, and I don't have any issues with them in general. But what I notice is that they don't pick up nuances. So
Yeah,
somebody could say, "Yeah, I'm interested in selling my house," but you could say that a different ways. You can say it sarcastically. You can say it with like, "Yeah, I am interested," but they wouldn't pick any of that up. To
yeah.
them, they're just hearing, "Oh, okay, great. Let me ask you the next question." Um, so let me ask you this. So in terms of so from a, I want to talk about Skip Genie for a second, just to get clarity on something. But from a big picture perspective, is just if you're starting out brand new, or even if you're not, even if you're an experienced person, right? Looking at, hey, the driving for dollars list, right? Number one, that regardless of whether or not you're new or experienced, you should have either you or somebody else be doing a driving for dollars campaign to try to find more leads, because it's cost effective and it's going to get you leads that other investors are potentially not also playing in the same, you're not playing in the same cage with them. And then you're taking those and you're initially batch skip tracing them. You're identifying, trying to get a hold of them, but at the same time, your service identifies the age and potentially the cease flag. If the cease flag is missing, they can look at the age and know that, hey, this person is 110, either she has great genes or maybe it's not recorded, right? And then on the ones that you feel that, yeah, I really want to find this one, they can go into the console and they can do a deep search. The deep search will give them even more information, but they also give them the relatives. And you can kind of then go from there, because you can take the relative, and if they have two different relatives or 2 people that show up, you can do a deep on them and then try to talk to them and just try to figure out some way to get a hold of someone that has an idea about this property. And then what you mentioned was that if you get someone that says, no, it's not mine anymore, then don't be okay with digging in a little bit more and saying, by the way, I realize that I know you said that it's not yours anymore. However, I did some research and I think that that's not the case, and walking them through that, because many times that's where your best opportunities lie. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, that you nailed it. And
Okay.
again, a lot of times I think either the county has foreclosed on it or a bank.
Right.
And what my response, I don't do calls anymore myself personally, but what we kind of respond to is like, yeah, you're right, the county will foreclose on it. They just haven't done it yet.
Not yet, right. But you still have a chance to take care of it, right?
My favorite response is, if you'd like to try and get some cash out of it before they do foreclose on it, I'd love to help you.
Okay.
And you start kind of waving that money in front of them.
So a couple questions. So I want to talk about Skip Genie. And again, as I mentioned before at the beginning of the call, I get no compensation from Skip Genie in terms of their service or me sending you guys over there, but it's a service that I use. So you guys have a couple different options, right? And maybe, because I want you to talk about you have the batch option, we have the deep option, and then you have some other stuff in there like the litigator list and a few other things. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so you can scrub once you pull a report up in the dashboard, you can scrub it for what we call connectivity search or connectivity scrub. So we give you a bunch of phone numbers, and some of them will be disconnected, but we don't know that just from the skip trace data. So we've integrated a third party, and that's a time saver, especially when you're manually dialing. It's just
right. Yeah.
So you can see right out the gate, okay, if it's been confirmed these are disconnected numbers, you don't have to dial those. And then we have the DNC scrub that will tell you if if a phone number's been registered on one of the national or state do not call list, or if they've been flagged as what's called the DMA, which basically is their known litigator.
Known litigator. Now, are those all separate?
Call known litigators.
Are those all separate, or are they all under the main scrub? Like, in other words, when you do the initial check, does it do it across all three of them, or you got to do each one individually?
When you hit that button D&C search,
yeah,
it'll do all of it, and it'll give you a breakdown for each number. It says federal or national, and then state, and then DMA.
So when you download, and then when you download it, then you make sure that you then decide what you want to do about those, right? Or it won't remove them from the download, right?
Yeah, we don't remove them. We just, again, none of us are attorneys. I'm not telling people to call, don't call. We're just allowing you to make an informed decision. So
right.
If you run those scrubs, you get to see that information.
Right. I mean, and again, this is not for you, but I tell you what I do, which doesn't necessarily mean I'm recommending you guys to do. But the way I look at it is, I'm not soliciting for marketing purposes. I'm not an agent. I'm an individual calling somebody else about a property that I'm interested in buying. And so, you could argue that it falls outside of the guidelines of the DNC, because I'm not soliciting. I'm just an individual. And also, especially if I'm calling from my phone, and so I'm not using a dialer, then that's another thing that's in my favor. And so that's how I look at it. So I'm a little bit, I would say, looser on that, because I'm not, again, I think if I was putting in 20,000 phone numbers into an auto dialer and hiring somebody from the Philippines to call all those people, then I start to think about the scrubbing, right? But if I'm just trying to get a hold of Mary Jo and I want to talk to her about her property and I want to just talk to her son, it's just a guy off the street trying to find the property. That's what I do. And again, guys, I'm not suggesting that you should do, nor am I implying that that's what Larry does. I'm just telling you what I do.
I'll tell you, Larry does the same. We think very similarly, and part of that, everything you said, that reasoning behind that, and also our messaging. We don't sound like a telemarketer.
Right.
We don't sound like a business. We introduce ourselves by our first names. Hey, I'm not sure if I have the right number, but my name is Larry Higgins. I was just trying to reach Bob about his house on Main Street. I was just curious if he had any interest in selling. Very low key. Sounds like Joe Blow off the street.
Right.
Doesn't sound like an annoying telemarketer. If they say, hey, take me off your list, or, sometimes you'll hear that. I'm sorry, man, we don't really have a list, but if you're not interested, I won't call you again. And
then now, just out of curiosity, when you when you batch script, skip trace, you're not going to get 100% output, right? So you're going to get some people that you're not going to have phone numbers for, right?
Yeah.
So a couple questions about that. Do you when you batch skip trace with you guys, do you charge based on submissions or the hits?
Well, we charge just based on hits. I know that's a common complaint with a lot of people's, in depending on the service, they get charged for whether it's a hit or not.
Right.
They ran a search, they pay for it.
Right.
So on average, we're at about 98% hit rate. And then, so for the 2%, if there's no hit, you don't get charged for that.
Okay.
Yeah,
which is important, because sometimes you might go to a skip trace service that at face has a much significantly lower cost per hit. And so the issues with that is that they might charge you per submission. So you might submit 1,000, they only get 700 or 600 of them, but you get charged for the 1,000. So although when you first submitted the order, you thought you were getting a great deal, but now you're getting less phone numbers. So when you look at that, you're actually paying more per record than you thought initially. And then the other thing I think about too, in terms of data quality, is that you want to get it pays to get high hit rate, because in our business, it's not as if we're selling widgets. We're dealing with houses, and a deal could be potentially worth $60,000. So every little hit counts, because that one hit you miss could be that deal that's that $30,000, $40,000 deal that starts off your real estate career, or the one that gets you the first deal. So I think I'm a big, a fan of that. So now, with the way that your service works, though, in order for somebody to sign up, if they wanted to sign up, and we'll post a link here in the description, they would go to skipgenie.com, and it is a subscription service, right? Okay. So they pay, and how much is the, I realize that that could change, you know, in the future, but as at the time of this video, how much is that per month?
Yeah, so we've got two plans. One is $47 a month, but it's a dollar 50 a search at that level. So that's going to be the people that are doing real low volume, just very low volume, basically. Then our most popular plan is it's $97 a month, but it's 25 cents a search.
25 cents a search. Okay.
And there's no requirement. You know, a lot of other services have a minimum search amount to get different rates. With us, you can go in the dashboard and do one search. It's 25 cents, or you can run a list of 10,000. It's going to be 25 cents a search.
Oh, so the deep search is 25 cents, the same as a batch.
Yes.
Okay. It's just that when you do it, the individual search, you're getting a little bit more granular data, and you're going to use that. But it is the same. The other thing that you guys do is you have some calls that you do also for the clients, right?
Yeah.
So how does that work?
Well, part of, data is half the battle. And one of the things I want to expound on, what you talked about, was hit rates. If you look at different data pending or batch services all across the board, on average, you're getting about a 70% hit rate.
Mm-hmm.
So right out the gate, you're losing almost 1/3 of your leads.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like going after return mail and vacancy. Even though everybody's calling, if everybody's only getting a 70% hit rate,
right,
you're at 30%, there's less competition there.
Right.
So something I just wanted to drive home, something I've really started talking about more. But as far as our weekly calls go, like I said, data's half the battle. When you get into strategies, and sometimes some of the best deals, let's say you've probably seen this if you've done enough of it, you look up the owner, they're dead, and there's no relatives. And there's just, there's no new addresses on there. It's like, what do you do? Sometimes you have to get outside of the skip trace database.
Yeah.
And, I'm on that call when we do them every Wednesday. And it's just to help kind of get people going. There can be a learning curve with this. Hey, what's the best hours a day to make the calls? Well, the short answer is, when can you? Do you have a full-time job and call in the evenings or whatever? But
yeah, and I've listened to I'm not I have not attended all the calls, but I have listened to the calls. You sent me also some calls from the past as well that I listened to, and it's a great service because they're getting coaching on how to use this effectively, right? Because one is the tool, but you're teaching them how to use the tool better so they can get the results. Because obviously for you guys, it benefits because people get success, and they're going to continue to be clients with you guys.
Yeah, it does us no good if you're using our data and you're paying a subscription for us, but you're not doing anything.
Right.
So,
right.
And I understand a lot of the challenges getting going with this. And I said, when we do those calls, I'll stay on until midnight or 1 in the morning. As long as people have questions, I'm there to answer them. I don't claim, sometimes we get into very newbie stuff like, hey, how do I get a contract signed or something like that? But generally it's more skip trace related or strategies. Got into the weeds on ringless voicemails last week. Some guy he had a good idea, and we just vetted it out a little bit for him. So.
Yeah, and the other thing I was going to mention is that the hit rate matters. The hit rate, and so, just as an example, if you go to a skip tracer and they say we'll do 20-cent leads, and you submit 1,000, but they're charging you on submission, but they only get a 70% hit rate, then the effective rate per record is 29 cents. So you're actually unknowingly paying more per record, and you're paying more per record of the records that they can't find, but then you're also putting yourself in a disadvantageous position because you're also not getting 30% of the other people, right? That they just weren't able to find.
And the other thing is, and again, I'm not bashing the other services. It's like some of those may make sense for other people depending on what they're doing, whatever, but we're giving you a more complete data set.
Right.
So to me, going back to death and age, a lot of those guys, they just want to dial as many numbers as possible.
Right.
Hey, they could use our data and say, I'm not digging in on any of them. I don't care if they're dead. We're just going to dial. If they answer, great. If not, cool too. So.
Yeah, you're right about that because If they have, 5 or 6 cold callers and that's all they do every day, then it doesn't matter. They need numbers and they need people to call, etc.
Yeah.
But for most of us that don't have that brute force, then yeah. So they can go to, for anyone who's interested, they can go to just skipgenie.com. Again, I'll put it in the link to the description. Again, guys, look, what we went through right now, I think, is a great strategy for anyone, right? Especially with the drive-bys and looking for those very specific. I mean, we laid out the entire strategy. And my recommendation is, if you're going to do this, go with them. Again, I get paid no money for recommending them. I get nothing. And, get on their calls. They're going to help you and walking you through, give you any tips or suggestions how to better the system, how to take advantage of it. And I think this is a great way for anybody to get started. I mean, really is the lowest, the lowest risk and the highest upside, because direct mail is tough. Direct mail is tough. And if you're already doing direct mail, then might be a good idea. Just I'll ask you this as a last thing. You guys do have a service. If somebody do you guys have something where somebody has a bunch of postcards, they can send them to you guys? Do you still have that or no?
Yeah. So that's the other thing. Just by accident, we learned a lot of investors had a lot of return mail, but they didn't know what to do with it. And then they're like, oh, great, you can skip trace it, but we don't want to mess with putting it in a spreadsheet so you can skip trace it. And then we kept hearing that enough. That was kind of friction. We said, you know what? Just mail it to us. We'll process it. You can literally mail us your return mail. We'll do all the data entry, all that stuff that we need to run a bulk skip trace, and then just email you the results.
I have to ask you this because it's for my own benefit. Do you think it's worth, like, say, for example, is it worth, let's say that I'm mailing a particular zip code that I really like to get properties in, but the mailing hasn't been working that great. If I mail and I get all the returns, is it worth it to mail just to get the returns? Do you find that the returns have any sort of significant output? Because most investors are not going to do that.
I would definitely give it consideration. I'd probably at least test it to some extent.
Yeah.
Especially if you're not already doing a lot of calls or skip tracing and cold calling in that area. If you don't have a niche list, you're already doing. It's basically giving you a very refined distressed lead. Whatever that list started as, you mailed it, now it's come back. Yeah. That's return mail is like another layer of distress as far as I'm concerned. And you've seen it on your return mail. It might be marked vacant or.
Yeah, I've got a bunch here.
And if you go through them, you'll see the post office will mark some of them vacant or deceased.
Right.
And again, going back to the prioritization, if you have 1,000 postcards, let's say you just wanted to log into our system and skip trace, I would say go through those 1,000. Which ones did the post office confirm vacant or deceased, or both? Sometimes you'll see that on postcards.
Sometimes you say vacant or deceased. Sometimes you see the unable to forward. I guess insufficient address, unable to forward.
Yep.
Which could just be, it could, the thing I look at is just regardless if people are mailing, they're getting the same return mail back because everybody's using the same vendors typically.
Yeah.
And most people are not doing anything else outside of this. It's just, like they're just sitting here at my desk. This is just a recent batch that we just got. And so I think when it comes down to the big, and I'm not going to keep you any longer, Larry, but I think the big thing that I get from this is that if you're willing to go above and beyond what others are unwilling to do. Because if you think about it, most investors will mail and just will take the cards and do nothing with it. The next layer is skip tracing them. And then the next layer after that is going through the list and figuring out which are the high prospects to go through. And the same thing that we just discussed here. Most people do driving for dollars. Most people will send letters and will stop at that. Some people might skip trace and will call people, and then they might get a hold of people or may not, and then that's the end of it. What Larry's doing is going that extra further mile, and the deeper you go, the better your chance you have of finding a deal, the better chance you have of finding a deal that everybody else has given up on. And, it doesn't, you don't need a lot of deals when you're popping, 30 or 40, 50 grand deals. This is not a guarantee that you're going to make that much per deal, but certainly I think this puts you in the opportunity, and it puts you in the pool of opportunity to get these type of deals.
Yeah, so and you're not spending that much money to do it.
Right.
Period. the ROI is huge. And, you know, and for the guys out there doing it, be tenacious, be persistent. We've gone so far as to hire genealogists, and on one deal, because we were able, I view a genealogist as like a marketing cost to us. We don't spend a ton on marketing.
Right.
I'll spend $150, $200, $300 on a genealogist. And on one deal alone in Houston, this was year 4 last, she helped us make $150,000.
Yeah, so it's definitely well worth it.
Yeah. Now, but that, again, I didn't give up. I could have I guarantee you other investors got return mail.
Yeah.
Or they might have even found it driving for dollars.
Yeah.
And, oh, guess what? Death, taxes, vacancy.
Yeah.
Well, it ended up having squatters in it, but it was vacant at one point.
Okay.
But everything told me it should be a deal. I just learning to be persistent. It's like I didn't stop until I was like, and that was a scenario where the heirs didn't even realize they owned it, and that's kind of what led to that. But you know, they're not all going to be that. All just have that mindset, like dig in, make the phone calls, do the research, get in touch with somebody.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. Well, Larry, I don't want to go any longer. I thought we were going to go 45 minutes, 30, 45 minutes. We're over an hour and 5.
I'll go for 6 hours, man.
Yeah, I know. But, you know, it's funny because, you know, this is a two-way, this interview serves 2 purposes, because I am doing it for my subscribers and for YouTube, but I also wanted to get a further clarity on a couple things. So we kind of killed 2 birds with 1 stone for my own personal business. So I appreciate that. And again, really appreciate the time, energy, and effort to be with me here today, and also for the service. We love the service, and I recommend you guys to implement the strategy, try out his service. They do great. The support calls are great. It's almost like coaching, and implement this particular strategy. So thank you, Larry. Appreciate that. And guys, remember to hit the subscribe button and make any comments. If you have any questions, if anything you need clarified, make a comment. I'll get it answered for you. If I don't know, I'll ping Larry and get any clarification on that. And then on the description here, I'll put a link directly to Larry's site, so you can go ahead and sign up and get started on implementing skip tracing and finding owners that are dead, have passed taxes, and what was the other thing?
Death, vacancy, and taxes.
Dead, vacancy, and taxes. The trifecta. All right. Thank you, Larry.
All right. Thanks, Chris.
All right.